Hey everyone, this is Matt from Endsickness. Today I'm going to talk about how the mast cells are the ones that cause all your autoimmune symptoms. And hopefully this will give you an idea of exactly how to approach this autoimmune disease differently and allow you to get to a point where you have finally overcome your symptoms like myself. So first let me say I'm not a medical doctor. This is not medical advice. This is based on my personal experience. This is for informational and educational purposes only. So back to the topic, okay? Autoimmune disease, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's, all these things are conditions where the immune system is attacking its own tissue, okay? And you're in a situation where your body's reacting and it's confused. The immune system's confused. It doesn't understand what's really happening, so it's attacking the wrong tissues. Now, the reality is the causes of all these different autoimmune diseases can be often the same things. From what I've seen, it is, what we're consuming, what we're inhaling, what we're thinking. And the reason is that your mast cells are the ones that create all of the inflammatory reactions that you call autoimmune disease, okay? And the mast cells are irritated by what we're consuming, what we're inhaling, what we're thinking. Those are the main things that really drive the mast cells to react and cause them to secrete the histamine, the cytokines, the prostaglandins, the leukotrienes, all these things that go ahead and aggravate your symptoms, that cause your symptoms, right? So the mast cells are the target for autoimmune disease. If you have autoimmune disease, everything you're doing has to go ahead and be targeted at calming down the mast cells on one side. On the other side, you got to make sure you're not irritating them with what we're eating, the emotional triggers, the things we're perceiving, the things we're inhaling, mycotoxins, chemicals, synthetic fragrances, things like that. All these things affect how the mast cells actually react. And when they react the wrong way, guess what? Your RA symptoms or whatever, they all flare up, right? So before I go further into that, I want to specify, okay, mast cells are the target for autoimmune disease. If you can get them under control, your symptoms are under control, okay? So there's two different ways you can go ahead and affect mast cells. One is by observing what you're doing. The other is by taking supplements, okay? Those are the main two ways. The third, I'd say, would be deep breathing and meditation, which I'll go into in a moment. But autoimmune disease, okay? Number one is always going to be diet, okay? And if we're still eating nuts, seeds, dairy, eggs, gluten, too much meat, we're frying all of our foods, or we have lots of animal products in our diet, then we are in a situation where we are more than likely triggering a lot of our symptoms unknowingly, right? And if we're eating things that have 15 ingredients in them, condiments, things like that, these spices, all that, it could put you in a place where you're reacting and you're just eating the same way over and over again. You call it autoimmune disease, but what's happening is you're actually reacting to these foods over and over and over and over and over again. And then you get huge flares and you don't understand why, right? And this is the trap most people are in autoimmune disease. They get these flares and they don't understand why it's happening. And they're like, oh my God, I got this condition. It's condition XYZ. That's why this is happening. No, it's tied to something that aggravated your immune system, right? So I point out the main irritants. The main foods you would want to consume when you have autoimmune disease is going to be your fruits, your rice, your potatoes, your vegetables, your beans and lentils if you can tolerate them. And those are usually the ones I add last. Then you got things like tofu, things like that. But really, the beans and the tofu I would add last. And I would try to start with mostly the plant-based foods and phase out that meat, the eggs, all the other things. Phase them out to a point where you're eating them less frequently, every other day, every third day, etc. And see the difference between how you feel after the reactions to these meat-based foods, or the animal product meals, but space them out every couple of days so you can actually see. And you'll see that the bloating is worse. You'll see that the constipation is worse. You'll see that the pains, the symptoms typically get worse within a few hours after consuming the meat, as long as you don't consume it every single meal. If you consume it every single meal, you can't even really tell because you're just in a chronic flare. So when we get these irritants out, right, out of the diet, like I said, the dairy, the nuts, the seeds, the gluten, the eggs, the meat, etc., the processed foods, etc. We get them out and we see what's left. Okay, well, most of the time the symptoms are much better from following the right diet consistently and doing mostly like oils, like I said, oils, fruits, vegetables, rice, potatoes, beans, oils, etc. But often the mast cells can be aggravated by other things, not just the diet, right? So once we go through the diet, we come through that, we get rid of the irritants there. Okay, now we know we're not irritating the mast cells in that particular area. Now let's focus on the next thing, the environment. Okay, when you have autoimmune disease, you have to often look into mycotoxins, and mycotoxin sensitivity is a common cause of autoimmune symptoms. Mycotoxins are mold toxins that are produced. So you could even have no mold in your house, but you could still have mycotoxins from past water damage that still irritate your immune system. And if your body, if you don't have proper circulation, ventilation, your windows are closed for months, you got the heat on, whatever, all these things that continue to worsen air quality, then you continue to flare up and you get worse, but you don't realize it's because of what we're inhaling, right? It's what we're inhaling. So it could be, off-gassing from radiators. It could be, it could be fragrances. It could be cooking smells. It could be mycotoxins. There's lots of things that impact air quality, and that does affect how you actually manifest. Most people who have autoimmune disease, in fact, have an environmental illness that they call autoimmune disease that has been misdiagnosed as autoimmune disease in my experience. And it's more an environmental illness that has been misdiagnosed, and we then went ahead after being exposed to something environmentally consistently. We continue to eat the same foods that triggered us, compounded with the stress and the trauma, and it manifested into this illness. So once we identify if there's mycotoxins through the mymycolab.com test, then we can see, do we have antibodies to mycotoxins right now in our present environment, in our past environment? We can see, is that an issue? If it is, then we have to address it, okay? Because if we have high antibodies, that could be the root cause of your autoimmune disease, right? The next thing is emotional triggers and trauma triggers, okay? Those things actually affect the mast cells as well. Nothing really affects the mast cells as much as mold does, mycotoxins do, because you're chronically inhaling it. And that's the biggest trigger in mast cell issues and autoimmune issues, I'd say, of everything. But the food would be number two, and number three would be the emotional or trauma triggers. But it just depends on the person. It could be the emotional and the trauma triggers that are number one or number two. It just all depends. So the emotional and trauma triggers. So there's emotions we haven't dealt with in our past that we just didn't have the emotional capability to process and to be able to come to grips with. So we store those emotions in our subconscious, and we're reminded of these things when we see them in our present environment, things that look like them, things that remind us of those situations that we have not dealt with, and then it triggers us emotionally, and that turns into symptoms physically after we suppress enough of these emotions. So we have to identify these hidden emotions, these triggers, and figure out where are the constant emotional triggers. Is it my husband? Is it work? Is it being sick? Is it whatever? And start to change the stories around each of these situations to be able to have the person feel safe and feel like they're not being triggered by their diet, not being triggered by their environment. Now they're not being triggered by their thoughts. Guess what happens? The body starts to heal itself, right? And this is how I first start off people who have autoimmune conditions, is we got to get all the triggers out of the way, right? Then after we do that, we see how close we are to healing, right? A lot of the time, we're much closer than we realize. We're 90% of the way there. We don't even need a supplement, right? But then we start to focus on what are the symptoms that are still left. Is it because of nutrient deficiencies? Is it because magnesium's low? Is it zinc low? Or trace minerals low? Or is our bacterial balance out of whack still? Do we need more prebiotics? Do we need binders to get rid of certain toxins? Do we need to go ahead and stimulate the immune system to go ahead and get rid of these pathogens and these things? This is the reality, when you're dealing with this type of scenarios, you have to focus on getting rid of the triggers of the mast cells first. Once you get rid of all the triggers, the body starts really stopping the inflammation process, and you feel better. And then you start to support the healing and calm down the mast cells further through these plant-based supplements. And this is how you get over this, So if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. Could go into more detail related to your specific symptoms. But thanks for watching, everybody. My website's endsickness.org. I have hundreds of articles, hundreds of videos on there. And hope to see you again at another video soon. Take care.